In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but some wars are remembered more than others. Some battles echo through the ages, their stories told and retold by those who survived them, their lessons carved into the annals of imperial history. This is the tale of the Sanctus Reach, a tale of worlds burning, a tale of heroes falling, a tale of a Space Marine chapter that fought until none remained. This is the tale of the Obsidian Glaives. The WAAAGH came from the depths of space like a green tide of destruction. Grukk, Face-Rippa led it, an orc warlord of legendary brutality even by the savage standards of his kind. He was enormous, towering over even other orcs, his body a mass of scars and muscle, his skull crowned with horns that might have grown naturally or might have been bolted directly into his bones. His armor was festooned with trophies. The corpses of Imperial Navy crewmen hung from wooden gibbets on his shoulders. Dozens of skulls rattled on his chest. He was a walking monument to the hatefulness and fury of the orc race. His fleet numbered in the hundreds. Crude vessels held together by faith in orcish gods and sheer stubbornness, they carved through the void toward the Sanctus Reach, a cluster of imperial worlds at the edge of civilized space. World after world fell before them. Populations were slaughtered or enslaved, cities burned, defenses crumbled, and then the green tide reached Obstiria. Obstiria was a harsh world, its surface scoured by radiation from a dying sun. Nothing grew there, no water flowed. The mountains that covered its surface were knife-sharp ridges of black rock, and the valleys between them were death traps for anyone without the augmented physiology to survive the planet's punishing environment. It was the perfect home for the Obsidian Glaives. The Obsidian Glaives were a chapter of Space Marines founded in the dark days after the Horus Heresy, when the Imperium struggled to rebuild from the wounds of civil war. They traced their lineage to rob out Guilliman himself, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, and they followed his Codex Astartes with the devotion of true believers. But they were not like other chapters. The Obsidian Glaives recruited from the dregs of Imperial society murderers, the condemned, men who had been sentenced to death for crimes so terrible that execution seemed too merciful. The chapter offered them something worse, a lifetime of service, of punishment that would never end. They would be transformed into Space Marines, the Emperor's finest warriors, but they would never be allowed to forget what they had done to deserve such a fate. The process of becoming an Obsidian Glaive was designed to break a man before it rebuilt him. Recruits were dropped onto the irradiated surface of Obstiria with nothing but their wits and their will to survive. They had to traverse the deadly terrain, endure the killing radiation, fight off the predatory creatures that somehow survived in that hostile environment. Many died. Those who survived reached the gates of Penumbral spike change, tempered by suffering into something harder, stronger, more resilient than they had been before. But even reaching the fortress was not enough. The aspirants then faced years of additional trials, surgical procedures that would transform their bodies, conditioning that would reshape their minds. They learned the history of the chapter, the traditions that bound it together, the philosophy that gave their suffering meaning. "This too we shall endure," was their motto. It was carved into the walls of their fortress monastery. It was inscribed on their weapons, their armor, their hearts. Every battle was penance. Every victory was simply another step on a road that had no end. They did not fight for glory or honor or the promise of redemption. They fought because fighting was their punishment, and they would accept that punishment until death finally released them from their service. The irony was not lost on them. They had been criminals once, men who had taken lives, broken laws, betrayed the trust placed in them. Now they were the Emperor's chosen warriors, defenders of humanity against the horrors of a hostile universe. Their sins had been transformed into strength, their guilt had become the foundation of their devotion. Their fortress monastery was called the Penumbral Spike, a great spear of stone that rose from the mountains of Obstiria like a monument to defiance. Within its walls, the Obsidian Glaives trained, prayed, and waited for the next war that would demand their sacrifice. When the orcs came, that war had arrived. Chapter. Master Midnias stood on the battlements of the Penumbral Spike, watching the darkness gather in the valleys below. He was old by any measure. Centuries of service had left their mark on him. His face was a lattice of scars, his body a map of wounds endured and survived. The crown of Obstiria sat upon his brow, a simple spiked band that symbolized his dual role as both chapter master and planetary governor. Not that he ruled anything beyond his battle brothers. Obstiria had no other inhabitants. It had no resources worth claiming, no strategic value beyond its position. Only the Obsidian Glaives could survive on its irradiated surface. That was about to change. "My lord," said Captain Terrendel, approaching from behind. "Our scouts report the greenskins are landing on the Belishar Flats. Initial counts suggest 70,000 in the first wave. More are following." Midnias did not turn from his vigil. 70,000, he repeated, "against 400 battle brothers. The odds have been worse, my lord." "Have they?" Midnias allowed himself a thin smile. "Perhaps. But these orks are different. They come with purpose. They come with a leader strong enough to hold them together. They did not choose Obstiria by accident." The chapter master finally turned to face his captain. His eyes were hard, calculating, already seeing the battles to come. "Summon the Dreadnoughts," he said. "All of them. If we are to endure this punishment, we shall need our ancestors to fight beside us." Deep beneath the penumbral spike, in vaults kept cold enough to preserve the delicate technology within, the Ancient Ones slumbered. 12 pedestals stood in the darkness, each one topped by a cradle of archaic machinery wreathed in cold vapor. In 11 of those cradles stood a dreadnought, massive war machines that housed the mortal remains of space marines too grievously wounded to fight on, yet too valuable to let die. They were the heroes of ages past, legends whose bodies had been broken but whose spirits endured. Brother Molkis had walked among them for only a few years, the newest addition to their ranks. He remembered little of how he had come to be here, fragments of a battle against some great beast, pain beyond imagining, and then the cold embrace of the sarcophagus that now housed what remained of his flesh. When he was awakened, the memories came flooding back, but they were jumbled, confused, bleeding into one another like colors swirling in water. He remembered fighting alongside Chapter Master Tekalon against an orc horde in a great cathedral. He remembered the tally of kills they had wagered, the boasts and challenges they had traded as brothers did. But Tekalon was dead, had been dead for decades. Midnias was Chapter Master now. The radiation of Obstiria did strange things to the Dreadnoughts. The connection between the sarcophagus and its pilot degraded with exposure, and with that degradation came confusion, memory loss, the slow dissolution of everything that made a space marine who he was. In the vaults, asleep and protected, the Ancient Ones could be preserved. Active on Obstiria's surface, they would burn through whatever time remained to them with terrible speed. But the chapter had need of them now. The chapter had need of its heroes. Tech Marine Javan moved from pedestal to pedestal, performing the sacred rituals that would awaken the sleepers. Each dreadnought required a specific sequence of prayers and activation rites, codes that had been passed down through generations of Tech Marines. Lights flickered, machines whirred to life. The cold vapor that had protected the Ancient Ones began to dissipate as warmth returned to systems that had been dormant for years or decades, and one by one, the dreadnoughts stirred. Scout Desaan stood at the edge of the vault, watching the awakening with a mixture of awe and sorrow. He was young, still undergoing the transformation that would make him a full space marine. The surgical scars were still pink against the skin of his face and scalp. He had been assigned to witness this moment, to serve as a tether to the present for warriors whose minds might be lost in the past. "Brothers," said Javan, his voice carrying through the vault. "The orc defiles Obstiria. Penumbral spike is besieged. The chapter calls upon you to defend it." The first to respond was Lord Fulminos, the greatest warrior who had ever worn the colors of Obstiria. In life, he had been a master duelist who sought out and faced in single combat every enemy champion who stood against him. His armor was encrusted with ornamentation earned through hundreds of notable kills, his glassy sword a relic of the ages before the heresy. If a sculptor had created an icon for a space marine to follow in battle, it would have looked like Lord Fulminos. "What heresy is this?" bellowed Fulminos, his vox speakers crackling with fury. "The orc defiles Penumbral spike. Obstiria weeps under the tread of the alien. And yet here we stand like idiot prey. I shall leave nothing but gore and misery of the Xenos horde. When I am finished, every orc will shriek in dismay at the very mention of the Obsidian Glaives. One by one, the others awoke. Hurlican the Bold, Lord Vorkius, crippled aboard the Space Hulk icon of debauchery, Lucanas the Penitent, who had turned himself into a mass of scar tissue through self-inflicted punishments, Drekkel the Martyr, who had fallen holding a mountain pass against savage Kroot, Brother Gidneron, whose gilded armor carried the standard of Obstiria, 12 dreadnoughts representing thousands of years of the chapter's history. 12 heroes returned from the edge of death to fight one final battle. They did not know it would be their last. The orcs came for Penumbral spike like a green flood pouring through the valleys. Warlord Flamegut led the first assault, a massive creature with a furnace built into his belly that let him vomit gouts of flame at his enemies. He was one of Grukk's lieutenants, sent to test the defenses of the Space Marines before the main host arrived. His forces numbered in the tens of thousands, orks of every size and disposition, from the smallest Gretchen to massive armored knobs that could match a Space Marine blow for blow. They hit the outer defenses of Penumbral Spike at dawn, when Obstiria's radiation was at its peak. The orks seemed unbothered by the killing light. Their crude physiology shrugged off doses that would have killed normal humans in minutes. They swarmed up the mountain slopes, dying by the hundreds to defensive fire, climbing over the bodies of their fallen to reach the walls above. The first breach came in the cathedral at the heart of the fortress, a vast chamber lined with stone benches and tapestries depicting the chapter's 1,000-year history. An ork bombardment brought down a section of the outer wall, and through that breach the greenskins poured like blood from a wound. Brother Molkis stood among the living Space Marines, his dreadnought chassis towering over them like a walking fortress. Captain Sahara led the 4th Company in the defense, holding his power sword high as a beacon for them to follow. As the orks surged through the breach, the Obsidian Glaives opened fire. The sound was deafening, bolters roaring, orks screaming, the wet thud of bodies hitting stone. The front rank of orks was shredded, but the density of flesh and bone protected those behind them. They crashed into the Space Marine line with the weight of an avalanche. Each Obsidian Glaive was worth 10 orks, but it seemed there were 100 orks in that melee for every Space Marine. In the close confines they could swarm the defenders and drag them down. The battle lines heaved back and forth, neither side willing to give ground. Brother Molkis called out a voice he knew. "I see you've decided to join us. Good kill, my brother. You shame us all with the tally you reap." Molkis turned, and for a moment he saw Chapter Master Tekalon standing among the defenders, power spear in hand, grinning as they had grinned together in battles long past. But Tekalon was dead. The radiation was already taking its toll. Molkis shook off the vision and focused on the battle at hand. Orks swarmed around him, their crude weapons bouncing off his armored shell. He crushed them underfoot, swept them aside with swings of his power fist, vaporized them with blasts from his lascannon. The cathedral floor grew slick with their blood. The Obsidian Glaives fought with the fury of men who knew they were already damned. Every death was penance, every kill was a prayer. They drove the orks back, step by bloody step, until Flamegut himself stood before them. It was Chapter Master Midnias who faced the Warlord. Their duel was brief and brutal. Flamegut bellowed flame, Midnias ducked beneath it and struck. One cut severed the orc's hand. A second plunged through its throat. A third ended it forever. With their leader dead, the orcs broke. They fled into the mountains, and the Obsidian Glaives pursued them, slaughtering them by the hundreds until the slopes of Penumbral Spike were carpeted with green corpses. It was a victory, but it was only the first battle, and Midnias knew the truth that his brothers did not yet see Flamegut had been a sacrifice. Grukk had spent the lives of thousands of orcs simply to learn how the Space Marines fought. The real battle was yet to come. They came in their hundreds of thousands. The WAAAGH descended upon Obstiria like a plague, darkening the skies with crude landing craft, filling the valleys with a tide of green flesh that seemed to have no end. Grukk Face-Rippa led them personally now, his massive form visible even from the battlements of Penumbral Spike, surrounded by his elite bodyguard and cheered on by the endless horde. The Obsidian Glaives numbered 400. The orcs numbered in the millions. It should have been hopeless. By any rational calculation, the chapter was doomed. But the Obsidian Glaives had never been rational. They had never fought because they expected to win. They fought because fighting was their penance, their punishment, their purpose. Midnias gathered his forces at Black Gulch, a deep canyon that any army marching toward Penumbral Spike would have to traverse. The terrain was treacherous, broken ground that would channel the orcs into a killing field while robbing them of their numerical advantage. If they were going to have any chance of victory, it would be here. 400 against 1,000,000, said Captain Kashuma, surveying the approaching horde through magnification lenses. The odds could be better. The odds are irrelevant, replied Midnias. What matters is the target. He pointed toward the heart of the orc army, where Grukk's massive form towered over his followers. Kill the warlord, and the horde breaks. We have seen it before. And if we fail, then we die well. This too we shall endure. Midnias turned to address his chosen warriors, 18 assault marines who had lost their squad leaders in the previous fighting. By tradition, such leaderless warriors formed the forlorn hope, the first through the breach. Midnias would lead them personally. Your objective is the alien known as Grukk, he said. With its death, the greenskins fall. Have faith that your brethren will be at your side, but fight as if you fight alone. Chosen brethren, with me. He stepped to the edge of the cliff overlooking Black Gulch. Below, the orks let up a cry to see the first space marine standing in their way. The sound was deafening, hundreds of thousands of voices raised in savage anticipation. Midnias leapt. His jump pack ignited, and he hurtled down into the heart of the horde, his brothers right behind him. The Obsidian Glaives firing line opened up at the same moment, pouring bolter shells and heavy weapons fire into the ork mass. Drop pods screamed down from orbit, carrying reinforcements from their strike cruiser Darkest Hour. The battle for Obstiria had truly begun. Brother Molkis fought among the returned heroes. Lord Fulminos led them, magnificent even in his war-torn state, his glassy sword a relic of ages before the heresy. They cut through the orks like a blade through flesh, their ancient weapons reaping a terrible tally. Hurlican saluted Molkis as they fought back to back, though the two had never met, their service as Obsidian Glaives separated by 2,000 years. Lord Vorkius speared giant armoured orks through their chestplates. Lucanus the Penitent scourged the enemy with his barbed power weapon, but the visions were growing worse. Molkis saw chapter masters who had been dead for centuries fighting alongside him. He saw battles he had fought long ago overlapping with the battle of the present. He called out to warriors who weren't there, responded to orders from commanders who had been dust for generations. The radiation was burning through what remained of his mind. Brother Molkis called Lord Fulminos. You have earned your place among us. Come, brother, he promises us a war that will never end. Molkis looked up, and he saw it a new sun rising over the peak of Penumbral Spike, a glare of white light that edged the mountain's rocks in silver. Through its light, he could see a distant field, an endless plain with an infinite army arrayed for battle. They were armored in gold and carried the standards of 1,000 Space Marine chapters. At their head stood the titanic form of the Emperor himself, ready to lead the final charge. Who will follow me? Called Fulminos. The eternal battlefield awaits. Behind Molkis, barely audible over the trumpets and war cries of the Emperor's host, a single voice struggled to be heard. Remember, it shouted. Remember. It was Scout Desaan, the young warrior who had been assigned to keep him tethered to reality. Desaan had followed the Dreadnoughts into battle, had watched them one by one succumb to the visions that the radiation conjured in their deteriorating minds. He had tried to reach each of them, to remind them who they were and where they were fighting. None of them had listened. The pull of the past was too strong, the promise of the eternal battlefield too seductive. What son of the Emperor would not want to fight at his side forever? But Molkis was already walking toward the light, toward the battlefield at the end of time, toward the war that would never end. The 12 Dreadnoughts fought magnificently in their final hours. They did not know they were dying. They thought they were ascending, joining their ancestors in a glorious crusade that would never end. Lord Fulminos cut through the orks like a scythe through wheat, his ancient blade singing with every stroke. Hurlican the Bold held an entire section of the battlements alone, his heavy weapons mowing down wave after wave of greenskins. Drekel the Martyr planted himself at a choke point and refused to move, killing everything that came within reach until his ammunition was spent and his power cells were drained. One by one, they fell. But even in falling, they did not truly die, not in their own minds. They believed they were joining the Emperor's infinite host, taking their place in an eternal war against the enemies of mankind. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps, at the end, the vision was not a delusion but a glimpse of what truly awaited them. The Imperium's faith taught that the spirits of fallen warriors joined the Emperor at his side. Who could say what the ancient heroes of the Obsidian Glaives saw in their final moments? Whatever the truth, they died as they had lived, fighting, enduring, refusing to surrender. Scout Desaan found the fallen Dreadnoughts after the battle was won. 12 massive war machines lay among the orc dead. Fulminos had made it almost to the peak ascent before toppling. The others had stood as living bastions until they too had fallen, each having reaped a massive tally of greenskin corpses. None of them had remembered who they were at the end. The radiation had burned through their minds completely, leaving only the instinct to fight, to kill, to serve the Emperor. They had died as heroes, surrounded by the ghosts of battles long past. Chapter Master Midnias stood beside Molkis's fallen sarcophagus. "I tried to bring him back," said Desaan. "I tried to remind him who he was, but he did not remember." "One of them did," said Midnias. "Out here, without even the walls of the spike to protect them, the degradation was faster than we expected, but they saved us. They held the line long enough for us to break the orks." "Does Molkis live?" "Barely. Techmarine Javan will tell us whether he will ever fight again." Midnias looked across the black mountains toward the horizon. "But this was only a testing of our defenses. Their warlord Flamegut was a lesser lord. The true command sacrificed him to learn how we fight. They will attack in their full force next." The captains followed Midnias's gaze. There they saw a greater darkness gathering among the shadowed valleys. It fell from the sky and spread across Obstiria like a disease. There would always be more orks. There would always be another battle. The final battle came at Black Gulch. Chapter Master Midnias led the forlorn hope personally, 18 assault marines at his back, their jump packs carrying them over the heads of the orc horde toward where Grukk waited. The rest of the chapter held the firing line at the head of the gulch, pouring death into the green tide while drop pods slammed down among them from above. Midnias's hands ached as he fought. They always ached, the ghost of pain from bones he had broken centuries ago, when he had killed another recruit to survive his trial on Obstiria's surface. That pain reminded him of everything he had done, every failure, every sin that had led him to this moment. He had been a criminal once, a condemned man, awaiting execution for crimes so terrible that death seemed too merciful. A skull-faced giant in black armor had come to his cell and offered him something worse, a lifetime of punishment, service that would never end. Midnias remembered that moment with perfect clarity, though centuries had passed since then. The cell had been next to one of the reactor housings, kept swelteringly hot so prisoners would sweat out all their defiance. The walls were inscribed with prayers of admonition and penance. His wrists, ankles, and throat had been bound with manacles. The skull-faced giant, a chaplain of the Obsidian Glaives, had asked him a simple question: "You are punished. Are you punished enough?" His answer had been instinctive. "For what I have done? No." "What if you could be punished?" the chaplain had said. "Not killed here, but to live an entire life of punishment, not pain, for pain can be adapted to and ignored, but a punishment of service that will never end. Even at your death it will not be finished. A true punishment as befits your crime against the Imperium of man." What would your answer be? Midnias had looked up at the dark shape, squinting in the half-light to make out the details of the ornate armor. His cracked lips had pulled back over broken teeth. "My answer would be, if you have the guts to imagine a worthy punishment, then I have the guts to take it on." He no longer remembered what crime he had committed. The memory had been burned away by decades of conditioning and combat, but he knew it must have been terrible to deserve a fate like this. The orcs closed around him as he fought his way toward Grukk. His sword was a blur, each stroke claiming another greenskin life. His brothers fell around him. One by one, the assault marines were dragged down by the sheer weight of enemies, but Midnias pressed on. He saw Grukk tear open a drop pod and rip out the space marines inside, cramming handfuls of broken ceramite and flesh into its monstrous maw. The warlord was laughing as it killed, treating the deaths of the Emperor's finest warriors as sport. "Are we but sport to you?" Midnias roared, climbing a rampart of butchered orcs to reach the warlord's level. "Then take this prize, alien. Wear this corpse on your armor. But cut me down first." Grukk bellowed a war cry in the orcish tongue. The other orcs nearby cowered back, for Grukk had marked out Midnias as his to kill alone. A strange sort of honor existed among the greenskins. The warlord's kills belonged to the warlord, and any orc who interfered would face its wrath. A punishment would be meted out here. The Emperor alone knew which one would suffer it. Midnias ran right at the towering orc. Grukk charged, horns down like a bull. They collided in the heart of Black Gulch, surrounded by the bodies of the dead, and the swirling chaos of the broader battle. The chapter master's sword arced down in a blur, its edge aimed for Grukk's neck. But the orc was faster than anything that size should be. It caught the blade between its massive hands and wrenched sideways. The ancient weapon, a relic of the chapter, carried by a dozen chapter masters before Midnias shattered. Midnias did not hesitate. He drove the broken hilt into Grukk's eye, drawing a bellow of rage from the warlord. He struck with his other fist, putting all his augmented strength behind the blow. It would have killed a normal human. Against Grukk, it barely made the orc flinch. The warlord's massive hand closed around Midnias's throat and lifted him off his feet. The chapter master kicked and struck, but his blows seemed to have no effect. Grukk's other hand tore away Midnias's helmet, exposing his scarred face to the alien's gaze. For a moment, the two warriors looked at each other, human and orc, chapter master and warlord, two leaders, each the embodiment of their respective kinds' approach to war. Then Grukk opened its massive jaws, revealing row upon row of fangs. In that final moment, as Grukk's mouth closed around his head, Midnias thought about punishment. He had spent his entire life being punished. For crimes he no longer remembered, he had endured centuries of war, sacrifice, loss. He had watched his brothers die. He had sent them to their deaths. He had worn the crown of Obstiria and borne the weight of an entire chapter's fate upon his shoulders. To deserve a death like this, he thought, to have served so unflinchingly, and yet be reduced to a trophy for an alien, he must have done something terrible indeed. Grukk's jaws closed. And Chapter Master Midnias's execution was carried out at last. The Obsidian Glaives fought on. Without their chapter master, without their ancient dreadnoughts, without hope of reinforcement or relief, they continued the battle. They fought in the corridors of Penumbral Spike as the orcs breached its walls. They fought in the vaults and armories and chapels of their fortress monastery. They fought until their ammunition was spent, until their blades were broken, until nothing remained but their fists and their fury. One by one, they fell. Grukk claimed his trophy, a neat pyramid of glossy black space marine helmets piled behind his throne. Someone, or rather some orcs' grots, went to great time and effort to describe patterns with the differently coloured ones. The few sergeants' markings, the captain's crests, the chaplain's skull-faced helm, all that remained of the Obsidian Glaives. When the last defender fell, when the Penumbral Spike was nothing but a smoking ruin, the orcs moved on. They had other worlds to conquer, other battles to fight. Obstiria held nothing for them now. Behind them they left only silence and death, and a chapter's 1,000-year history reduced to ash. 7. But this is not where the story ends. For even as the Obsidian Glaives made their final stand, other battles were being fought across the Sanctus reach. Other heroes were rising to meet the green tide. The sacrifice of the chapter had not been in vain. It had bought time, precious time, for the Imperium to respond. On the world of Ghoul Jensen, Governor Jensen rallied his forces to defend the hive cities that bore his family's name. His 15 wives, daughters of noble houses, trained as warriors and advisors, fought beside him as the orcs breached the outer habrings. Sasha swung her crackling power maul into orcish faces. Beatrix emptied pistol after pistol into the green tide. The defences held, then buckled, then held again, buying precious time for civilians to evacuate. Jensen himself led the defence of the outer emplacements, his ancient artificer armour proof against orcish blades. When rocket-propelled orcs descended from the sky to silence his guns, he met them blade to blade. When artillery fire brought down sections of the wall, he rallied his men and held the line. The hive burned around him, but still he fought. In the end, Ghoul Jensen would fall. The orcs were too many, too relentless. But the evacuation succeeded. Millions of civilians escaped to other worlds, carried to safety by the time the defenders had bought with their lives. Governor Jensen was last seen standing atop the ruins of his palace, chainsword in hand, surrounded by the bodies of the orcs he had slain. On Alaric Prime, the Space Wolves descended from the sky to reinforce the beleaguered Imperial Knights. Ragnar Blackman and the Great Wolf Logan Grimnar led their great companies into the heart of the Orc invasion, their fury matching that of the Greenskins blow for blow. The war on Alaric Prime centered on Sacred Mountain, a vast peak that rose from the planet's surface like a spear aimed at the heavens. The Night Houses of Alaric Prime had revered it for generations, believing it to be the physical manifestation of the Emperor's will. The orcs had landed at its base, drawn by the same mystical significance that made it holy to the humans. Pack Aesor of the Space Wolves fought their way up the mountain's slopes, hunting an orc warlord who carried a Daemon virus in its machinery. Rune priest Uli Iseclaw faced the creature in the tunnels beneath Sacred Mountain's peak, in a chamber filled with ancient technology from the Dark Age before the Emperor. The battle was fought on two fronts, physical and psychic. While his brothers engaged the orc's physical form, Uli battled its Daemon spirit in the realm of the mind. The corruption tried to enter him through his pride, the sin of every space marine. But Uli was a son of Fenris, and he turned that pride against the Daemon itself. "I am a space marine and a son of Fenris," he had roared, his voice echoing through both realms. "I know no fear, and I saw worse than this before I left my crib." The Daemon's rage consumed it. Uli emerged victorious, though the cost was high. Pack Aesor was diminished, its numbers reduced, its survivors scarred in ways that would never fully heal. But they had won. Sacred Mountain remained in Imperial hands, and the war for Alaric Prime would continue. The war for the Sanctus Reach would continue for months, then years. World after world would be contested, lost, reclaimed, lost again. Millions would die, soldiers and civilians, humans and orcs alike. The final outcome would hang in the balance until the very end. But through it all, the sacrifice of the Obsidian Glaives would be remembered. They had bought time. Precious hours, precious days, while the rest of the Imperium marshalled its forces. They had shown that even the mightiest WAAAGH could be resisted, that even the most overwhelming odds could be defied. They had proven that Space Marines would fight to the last, would die standing rather than flee, would endure any punishment rather than surrender. In the great sagas of the Imperium, the fall of the Obsidian Glaives would be recorded as a tragedy, an entire chapter wiped from existence in a single campaign, 1,000 years of history, 1,000 heroes, reduced to a pyramid of helmets behind an orc warlord's throne. But it would also be recorded as an inspiration. "This too we shall endure," the Obsidian Glaives had said. And they had endured until the very end. They had shown that punishment could be transformed into purpose, that damnation could become devotion. They had demonstrated that even men who believed themselves unworthy of redemption could die as heroes. Let their names be remembered, let their deeds be sung, let their sacrifice echo through the ages, a beacon of defiance in the darkness of the 41st millennium. The Obsidian Glaives are gone, but what they stood for, duty, penance, the absolute refusal to surrender, will endure forever. In the cold vaults beneath Penumbral Spike's ruins, a single light still blinks. Brother Molkis' sarcophagus lies where it fell, half buried in rubble, surrounded by the decaying corpses of the orcs he killed in his final battle. The radiation of Obstiria continues to beat down upon him, continuing its slow destruction of the delicate systems that keep him alive. But Molkis is not dead. Not yet. Somewhere in the shattered remnants of his mind, memories stir. He remembers fighting alongside brothers whose names he has forgotten, in battles whose outcomes he can no longer recall. He remembers the weight of his blade, the roar of his guns, the satisfaction of enemies crushed beneath his armored fist. He remembers what it meant to be an Obsidian Glaive. Perhaps, someday, someone will come. Perhaps the Imperium will reclaim Obstiria, will search through the ruins of the Penumbral Spike, will find the last survivor of a chapter that gave everything in defense of humanity. Perhaps Molkis will be awakened one final time, restored to fight in wars yet unimaginable. Or perhaps he will sleep forever, dreaming of battles past and battles yet to come, waiting for a call that will never arrive. Either way, he endures. This too we shall endure. This too we shall endure.